Good evening. I like the participation. Thank you. So we appreciate you coming to tonight's panel discussion on the illusions of peace and ceasefires. I am the Executive Director of Bright Stars of Bethlehem, Tracy Ortman, and before we get started, a couple reminders. If you could all check to make sure that your cell phones are on silent, now would be a good time to make sure. During tonight's event, we will start with some questions to our panelists. We will open it up for questions later. That's why you have those nice cards, or you were given them on your way in. So as you are thinking of questions, please write them down, and we will have individuals come through and collect them partway through our presentation tonight, and we will get to as many questions as possible. So again, we thank you for coming here. I'd love to introduce our speakers for tonight. So first we have Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahab, who was born and raised in Palestine, is a co-founder of Bright Stars of Bethlehem, and the founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University. He previously was a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, and the elected president of the Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, serving in this capacity from 2011 to 2016. Mitri is the leading Palestinian theologian of our time, having written, contributed to, or edited more than 54 books. His publications have been translated into an astounding 11 languages. He's an internationally acclaimed speaker who has appeared before the US Congress, European Union, and Scandinavian and Dutch parliaments, to name a few places. He has given lectures at universities around the world and has appeared in many major news outlets, including CNN, ABC, the BBC, Al Jazeera, The Economist, and Newsweekly. Then Joanne Cummings, who is a Bright Stars of Bethlehem board member, is the director of Middle East Studies and a lecturer in political science at the Baylor Interdisciplinary Core, where she specializes in Middle Eastern and international policy dynamics. After a distinguished career as a Foreign Service Officer in the U.S. Department of State, she retired in 2020. During her tenure, she led a U.S. diplomatic mission and managed political and economic units, advising senior military commanders in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the broader Middle East. Additionally, she spearheaded the U.S. humanitarian programs addressing displacement issues in Iraq, and she is currently the diplomat in residence at Baylor University. And then going to our third panelist, Rami G. Khoury, who is also a board member. Rami is a Palestinian-American academic and journalist whose family resides in Beirut, Amman, and Nazareth. During his 50 years as a journalist in the Middle East, he was editor of the Jordan Times and the Daily Star Beirut newspapers. He contributed reporting and opinion pieces from the region to the Financial Times, NPR, BBC Radio, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and other outlets. He has published books on social economic development and archaeology in Jordan, and he is writing an analysis of the half-century of transformation in the Middle East. He founded and directed the Islam Affairs Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, where he also taught journalism for a decade and launched the Global Engagement Initiative from AUB's New York City office. He's been a Harvard Nieman Journalism Fellow, a Senior Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, and a Fellow of the Palestinian Academy Academic Society for the Study of International Affairs in Arab Eastern Jerusalem. He's been a visiting scholar at 6 universities, and he is currently a Distinguished Fellow at IFI, a Senior Fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C., and a regular contributor to Al Jazeera Online. Please give a round of applause for our panel. We're so glad you could join us tonight and share your wealth of knowledge on this topic. So, Mitri, I would like to start with you with the title of tonight's event is the illusions of peace and ceasefire in the Middle East. So what does that mean?
I mean, it means there is no ceasefire, not in Gaza, not in southern Lebanon, and not in Iran. In fact, I believe that the whole idea of ceasefire in Gaza actually was an idea to save Israel from Netanyahu. Remember, until that moment, people were going into the streets in London, in the US, everywhere, actually not only demanding ceasefire, but also accountability. Once a ceasefire was announced, that whole movement actually was put on hold. Now it's trying to get again up and running, but actually this is what the ceasefire did. So we were calling for a ceasefire, but not this kind of a ceasefire where Israel now gets 50% of the land in Gaza, which is, as you know, the tiny strip that was the most populated area in the world, and now even Israel took half of that and destroying over 70% of the infrastructure. So ceasefire, there is no ceasefire.
Joanne, I'd like you to also answer that question. Reminder of that is the title of tonight's event is Illusions of Peace and Ceasefire in the Middle East, and what does that mean?
I'm going to look at it more from the perspective of the whole Middle East, because the illusion of peace is also tied to an illusion of war. In the United States, we often look at the entire region, not us, of course, other people, look at the entire region as being something that is innately violent, innately unstable. And so the idea that we can say, well, there's a ceasefire, so there's peace, is starting from a very different starting point than you might with another region of the world. The challenge that we have right now, particularly with the administration in the United States right now, is that we need to bear in mind that an absence of a certain kind of military action does not constitute a sustainable and just peace.
Rami, would you like to share on the same question, please?
Thank you. My view on this is the first word, the illusions of ceasefire and peace. I think the evidence that has emerged, not just in the last 6 months or so, not just in the last 2.5 years with the Gaza genocide, but really over the last 60, 70 years, there's sufficient evidence to show that neither the State of Israel nor the major Western powers were ever genuinely sincere about moving towards a situation in the region where the Palestinians could live peacefully in their state, as could Israel, and all the Arab states around them and Iran would all have their rights as well. Through this, I was born in 1948, so the modern Middle East conflict, and I've lived in Lebanon and Jordan and Palestine and Syria, and so I've watched this close up for decades. And it's clear now, the overwhelming evidence is that insincerity, collusion with criminal actions by Israel, culminating in genocide and now the continued expansion of the territory of Israel, that all of these things have been a base for how most of the Western countries work, not all of them, but most of them. And the United States falls into this category as well. There were flashes of, I think, really good work by the United States. For instance, the Madrid process after the Gulf War was a really important moment where the U.S. really worked as a mediator that brought the two sides together to achieve the legitimate rights of both sides. We haven't, Camp David didn't do that. So there were instances where the West was able and the US were able to really activist mediators and even-handed negotiators and mediators and to bring the people together. But in the last couple of decades at least, this has all been proven to be false hopes, insincere. And the problem is for the US especially, is that there will be and already has been some serious pushback, which you can sometimes feel in your own institutions and lives. If you work in a library or a university or a media organization or a charitable society, there are things that you don't do now that you did years ago because you're afraid that you're going to be shut down, or you're afraid that somebody's going to accuse you of anti-Semitism and therefore you'll have your funds frozen. There's prohibitions and restrictions now on active daily life functions for people involved in the Middle East, charitable societies, humanitarian aid, negotiations, education. There are limitations now that didn't exist before, and these are now infringing on and ravaging, or at least reducing, the basic civil and constitutional rights of all American citizens. So people now cannot easily go to a public library and hear a lecture on Palestine, even if it's a happy lecture about peacemaking. So all these pressures are coming, and they've all come from the region, and they've been heightened now by what's going on, and the illusory ceasefires are probably the most dramatic example of this structural insincerity, and I would even call it deception, that has been practiced by many countries. And we're all feeling the impacts of this now. With Iran, the whole world is feeling the impact.
Thank you so much. As we're talking about this, what are some of the things that people might want to know about the current situation? And what are things you think they definitely should know? And Joanne, I'd like you to take this question first.
Having served as a diplomat throughout the Middle East, in Jerusalem and Damascus and Sana'a, and even going to high school in Iran, there are things that I simply consider basic knowledge that people would have. But in the United States, particularly when I'm teaching my students, I'm very aware that it's not just a question of teaching information that is not known. It's a matter of unteaching information that is known incorrectly. So I think one of the most important factors here, and I touched on it a bit earlier, is the idea that we are dealing with ancient hatreds. How many of you have heard this term? It's a matter of ancient hatreds, exactly. These are not ancient hatreds. These are fairly modern political dynamics. Many of them exacerbated by the West, by the United States, by England and France. Many of them related to the creation of the modern state of Israel, but also dynamics within other countries. I would trace a lot of it back to World War I. Every school child in the Middle East knows about the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Americans do not. So there is an entire framing of history that we put in a context of, what can you do? It's just the way it is. And, folks, that's a cop-out. Because it means we don't have to analyze it, we don't have to think about it, we don't have to understand it, because it's just the way it is. So what we don't know, and I think we should know, is that people have similar goals and dynamics around the world. We can, in fact, understand them.
Rami, same thing to you. What are some of the things you feel people might want to know, and what are some things they definitely should know?
Well, there's a lot, but I'll give you just one or two. I think the single most important thing that people in the US and the West should know and don't usually know about the Middle East is how deeply attached ordinary men and women and children are linked to their land, their soil. You know, you look around the Middle East and you have family names that are the names of cities: Damashqi, Qudsi, Nabulsi, Isfahani, Salti. You go around the whole Levant, and I don't know if it's like that in West Africa, I don't know it well enough, but certainly in all the Levant, the names of families are the names of their cities because they're so deeply attached to their soil, and they've been there for most of them hundreds of years. Some of them can trace their lineage back a millennia in some cases, but that's hard to verify. So this is something that the Western countries and media and governments generally don't appreciate. They look at the people of the Middle East as people on a game that's a combination of, if you take the current American administration, they're playing a game in Washington that's a combination of risk and monopoly. Risk, you move the soldiers around, you have wars, you take over territories, people disappear. And monopoly, you make money. That's when you bring in Tony Blair and the carpetbaggers and some of the current people in the US administration. I call them the carpetbaggers and the carpet bombers, because that's what they're doing. If you look at what Israel is doing in Gaza, was done in Gaza, what's doing in South Lebanon, they're carpet bombing, destroying entire places, villages, evicting people, and then they come up with ideas, well, let's do a real estate development, let's make a vacation home community on the ocean. So the carpetbaggers and the carpet bombers have pretty much dominated the policy making of the US, mostly, not always, but in many Western countries. And so the people have to and therefore they don't understand. And Trump said it, you know, I don't understand. Why don't they just surrender? We're bombing the hell out of them. Why don't they just surrender? And why doesn't Hamas give up its weapons? And why doesn't Hezbollah go home? Well, they are home, but why don't they give up? So the inability of the Western, let's call it cultures generally, to understand the nature of peoplehood, citizenship, statehood, community, identity, solidarity, all of these dignity, all these abstract nouns that shape the lives of individuals and entire communities and cause them to keep resisting. They keep pushing back. They get the hell beat out of them in Gaza, in Lebanon, and everywhere, Iran, but they don't give up. I mean, they flee sometimes with their kids just not to be killed, but most of them keep finding ways to fight back because that's who their name is their land. The first thing that a baby gets in the Levant is their name, and the name is their land. So people need to understand that linkage and why people fight and why people push back. And linked to that, I'll stop with this, the link to that is all of the countries of the Middle East, of the Arab region, and the Islamic majority countries, all of them have accepted to live peacefully with the Jewish majority state of Israel. The propaganda you hear is, well, they want to kill Jews, they want to drive Israel into the sea, they want to destroy Israel. That's completely untrue. And if you talk to any diplomats or serious journalists who know the region, they'll tell you that the Arab position is, and still is today, that we will coexist with a state of Israel that's Jewish majority, as the UN resolution 47 decreed, but they have to live with a Palestinian state. And the Israelis have never made that commitment. They made it back in the partition of the UN, and the UN partition plan, they promised to treat everybody equally, etc., and let the refugees back, but of course they didn't. Well, this is part of the insincerity that I mentioned in my first answer. There's a kind of structural duplicity in what the Israeli and most Western governments do in dealing with the people of the Middle East, the Arab, the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and it's because of what I just mentioned. They don't understand that these are people who are so deeply committed to their land and their homes and their traditions, and they will fight to the death if they have to do it. And we've reached this extraordinary moment where two groups, the government of Iran and the Hezbollah, twice have forced the United States and Israel, the strongest military powers in the Middle East ever, two nuclear-powered countries, have forced them twice to make ceasefires. But they were insincere ceasefires. They weren't real ceasefires. And this was the old colonial game over and over again, but we'll get into that later.
Mitri, especially being in Bethlehem right now, what are some things you wish people know about what's happening, or that you think is they might be interested in knowing?
Yeah, I mean, if it were another crowd, I mean, here we have people who really are friends of Palestine. I would have said, you know, the existence of Christians in Palestine, and that those Christians goes back to 2,000 years ago. But this is a public knowledge in this group. So, but I think what many people in this country don't realize is what Israeli occupation really means. That Israel controls every single thing in our life. They control the water, they control the borders, they control the streets, they control the gates, they control the trade, they control the air that we breathe, the magnetic, electromagnetic field. So we still in Palestine have 3G on our telephones, because Israel doesn't allow us to have 4G, which you had here 10 years ago, and now you have 5G, right? So, but I think the most dangerous thing that people don't understand sometimes is that Israel controls the narrative. That is the most dangerous thing. And lately I have been working on a new theory that says actually, I have been working on Christian Zionism for a long time, but lately I came to realize I invented something called cultural Zionism. And my theory is that every person without exception in this country is by default a cultural Zionist. Not because that person is bad, but because you drink cultural Zionism with the milk of your mother. This is what you are bombarded with 24/7. In the news, in the schools, everywhere you turn radio, TV, you read the newspaper, a text in the school, you always get this, the Holocaust. You get Israel, the most democratic country in the world. You get Arabs, a friend of mine did something about Hollywood films. 98% of the Hollywood films have the Arab or the Palestinian as the bad guy, while the Jewish guy is always the funny, smart guy. Now, all of this goes into the subconscious and make people in this country, by default, cultural Zionists. And to unlearn this, you need to be either a very sophisticated person, or you have went and visited Palestine and saw with your own eyes, because then your eyes and your ears can actually take over what you have learned all through your life. And now what Rami just said, that Palestinian voices are silenced, this is again just to control the narrative. So thank God that all of you have had this revelation and now you know much better.
Well, and actually, I'd like to touch on that idea that Rami mentioned earlier of how important it is to be resilient right now.
I think it's very simple. It's because they're normal human beings. It's what the Israelis did, it's what Jews did in Masada, it's what Jews did when they were exiled in Babylon, it's what Jews did when they were mistreated by the Christian white European racists in Europe and Russia for decades. It's what created the movement of Zionism to create a country where Jews could live normally. They tried to fight back as much as they could, but they were totally helpless. So the Jews in Europe were like the Palestinians in the region today. They just didn't have the means to fight back. But the Palestinians, because of the geography and the numbers, and they're in their home, they can keep struggling as much as they can. But it's just human nature. There is no power, in my experience, there's no power in the world greater than the will of an individual or a community, the indomitable will of an individual or a community to live in freedom, peace, and dignity. It doesn't mean they have to be rich, doesn't mean they have to be powerful, but they have to live the way they want to live, with dignity and not to be controlled by others. The Zionist movement, the early Zionist movement wasn't explicitly colonial, saying we're going to take over all this land and create a state and throw out all the Palestinians, but it became so early on, especially when it linked with British colonialism. And when the British colonial movement and the Zionists in Europe got together, then they said, we've got to have the state, we've got to get the Palestinians out. And they drove out half of the Palestinians by 1948, but they couldn't drive them all out. The people keep resisting. And it's not just the Palestinians in Palestine, Palestinians all over the world. Some of you are here, people in Europe, all over the world, young Palestinians, old Palestinians. They keep passing the stories down to their children, and this is exactly what every human being, every human community does. It's biological, it's not ideological. It's biological. And they keep doing it until they achieve a sense of balance, a sense of justice. And despite all of the things that have been done to the Palestinians, what the Israelis have done with explicit, eager American assistance during the Gaza genocide was invent incredible new ways to kill Palestinians, including babies freezing to death, babies starving to death, babies dying because they couldn't get clean water or medicine, families burning in their tents, refugee families running away and being bombed. The same thing is happening in Lebanon. This vicious, barbaric form of colonial imperial aggression against a pretty much helpless community continues. It's not new. It's been going on for almost a century now. But what is new is that the Palestinians, the Iranians, their Lebanese colleagues, people in Yemen, everywhere have finally realized that they still remain committed to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. The Iranians, Hezbollah, Hamas, all the Arab governments remain committed to a negotiated peaceful resolution, which the Israelis and the Americans have never responded to. The Arab Peace Plan of 2002, the US and Israel have, until now, I think I'm right, have never given a formal response. The Israelis are fighting human nature, and they're going to lose. And this is going to be becoming more clear now as the public opinion balances all over the world shift against Israel for Palestinian justice and for justice for both people. I think we have to constantly remind ourselves we're looking for a resolution that's peaceful and equitable, anchored in law. But one of the things that the genocide did before the Israelis, with heavy American support, ran a genocide against the Palestinians, they ran a genocide against international law and human rights protections. For the previous 7-8 years, the constant exception made for Israel to comply with international law, human rights regulations, conventions, UN decrees, anything that was created by the world to protect people and have justice for all was systematically first ignored, then challenged, and then demolished by the combination of the State of Israel and the United States mostly, with a few other Western countries chipping in. So this is the very difficult situation we're in, which is why the region has exploded into violence, because there is no more international legal mechanism to stop the wild violence, and there is no more single credible international power that can step in as a mediator to stop the violence and shift us towards a peaceful resolution. But we're still working, everybody is still working, people in the US are working, in the government, even quietly, outside the government, in academia, everywhere. And one day this will happen.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
You want to say more about inshallah?
No, I was just agreeing with him.
Well, but that leads, Rami, you just led right into the next question, which is kind of what role does the U.S. play in the situation, and why does that matter right now today? And Mitri, if you'd like to start with this one.
Actually, you should start with this one.
Sure.
The U.S. And I can then maybe.
You know, talking about the U.S. and the Middle East really requires looking sort of back at, for those of us who went to school in the United States, we learn about manifest destiny, we learn about American exceptionalism, we learn about the grand expansion into the wilderness and the conquering of North America. And, you know, most of us in school do not hear about the expulsions and the genocides of the people who were here. And it is part of this thing that we grow up with, that the United States is in many ways given a God-given right to set its own path. When political Zionism was advocating for itself to the United States, they definitely used this American framework. Just as you went out as pioneers and settled the wilderness, so we are going out as pioneers and settling the wilderness. It's just a desert, we're going in, we're making bloom, blah, 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 all that stuff. The challenge that we face now is that this basic sense of Americans are in some way special has transferred over to how we view Israel. Israel is also special. It gets exempted from many requirements of international law, to the extent that the American government has now stated there is no such thing as international law. Now, part of that is President Trump not wanting himself to be bound by any expectations of, shall we say, morality or integrity. But it does play into the difficulty now of on what basis is the United States going to operate in the Middle East in a productive way? As Rami said, in the past, we have at times attempted to do that. But when we fall back as the United States on a sense that we and our friends, people we have designated as our friends, have a carve-out in behavior, then it is very difficult for us to be seen by other countries as having the ability to speak with any kind of authority. If you look at what brings together many of the countries that would not automatically have things in common, there's anger at how the United States has facilitated and been complicit in a genocide in Gaza. People can be angry about that, even without having had a common political perspective on the state of Israel previously. And this is a fundamental tipping point in how people view this kind of action in the world and whether the United States can speak on it. Now, when the United States and Israel together then commit military aggression on Iran, whatever we think about the government of Iran, I am not a fan, but the actions that have been taken against Iran, of course, have been pointless and ineffectual, but they have also been enormously damaging to the Iranian people, partly because whatever forces there were that were bringing people together, and let's remember, the Iranian people have a lot of experience with diplomacy, with self-government, with democratic processes. They are not a primitive people. And when the United States, which, was sort of seen as possibly a good thing because the government didn't like them, so if you don't like the government, you like the United States. Well, we've been blowing up civilian infrastructure. People no longer like us. All of these things are contributing to a degradation of the ability of the United States to play a functioning, positive role in the Middle East. As a career diplomat, I hate to say that. It does not make me happy. Can we come back? Well, that depends on whether we as the United States are going to come back from this abyss into which we've fallen now. If we can, then we can reclaim a productive role on the world stage.
I mean, I cannot really, as non-American, speak to this, but for me, it has to do with what you said earlier. It has to do with the narrative. How the U.S. looks at Israel is different than how it looks at any other country. And if you want to understand that best, listen to the speech of Vice President Pence in the Knesset 6 years ago, or 8 years ago, where he says, he compares the first settlers who came to this country with the Jewish settlers who came to Palestine, which means whenever the U.S. looks in the mirror, it sees Israel, and vice versa. So this is the first thing. The other thing, I think, which maybe sometimes here people try to forget, the U.S. has always had two faces. Meaning, you have the Constitution with many great things. You have democracy, at least until recently. But on the other hand, you had settler colonialism against the Native Americans. You have slavery, which went hand in hand with this. And I think this other side of settler colonialism and slavery is what we see in Israel today. And so, I had lunch with the former German foreign minister, and he was telling me, I told him, the question was, why isn't Germany recognizing Palestine when their official policy is for a two-state solution? And I kept, pushing him, and then he said, but we support Israel because we share the same values. I said, which values you mean? Genocide? You know, Germany did the first genocide in Africa at the beginning of the century. I mean, let's talk, what values are you talking about? And the last thing I think which plays a big role is the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby in this country functions like a mafia. So if you open your mouth, they go against you. And they can destroy your career, they can destroy your business. And people are afraid. I can understand it. Nobody would like to sacrifice his or her life on the altar of Palestine. I mean, right? So I think these three issues are important to understand why is the US always siding with Israel and cannot be really even-handed, which we always are calling for.
Before we tackle another question, I want to remind everybody in the audience, if you have questions you are interested in asking, please pass them to the end of the rows so we can tackle some of them in a minute.
Can I just add a note to what
Please do.
Mitri said? Just to add a bit to what Mitri said, one of the most perplexing phenomena in this whole issue is how can a country like the United States, which has exhibited magnificent behavior, benevolence, charity, generosity, equality, self-determination, you can name a whole page of wonderful things in American life that are truly structural to this society. How do we reconcile the goodness of America with the savagery that it supports abroad? And we see this savagery now not only implemented in the Middle East and elsewhere as well, but mostly in the Middle East, but it's openly supported by the highest echelon of government in the US, and the deception to keep this going is constantly practiced at the highest level of the government in the ceasefire and the peace talks. Tomorrow and the next day there's talks in Washington between the Israeli and Lebanese diplomats, probably at ambassador level. These are now the U.S. is saying, look, we're bringing peace to Lebanon and Israel. This is one of the greatest, I don't know to call it a hoax or just wishful thinking taken to an extreme of delusion, but it's going on, and this is how the system operates. So how do you reconcile the two faces of America? I think this is a critical question that only Americans can answer, and you can only answer them in public. This is not something that you discuss quietly at home. These issues have to come out of the shadows and be discussed in public, and Americans have to define what their country really stands for. I believe, from my knowledge and lifelong involvement in it, it stands for the goodness that I mentioned, but it also practices the colonial savagery. And Israel is the last colonial outpost, by the way, major outpost in the world. And the uprising against Israel by the Palestinians and others, and fighting back against it, and the massive demonstrations all over the world, at all the graduation ceremonies, many of them today, you see a kid hold up a Palestinian flag, or somebody making a statement at a commencement address mentions Palestine. Somebody who was going to make a commencement speech at Rutgers the other day is forbidden. This is a global movement for justice. And this is a real sign of the change that's starting to happen. And public opinion polling shows it. You have elections in the US now, primary elections where candidates openly say we're not going to support sending guns to Israel and this and that. So there definitely is a change. underway. It's a slow process. It takes time to happen. But I think we're in a moment where serious public discussion in a civil manner and accurately is what is needed most. And this is part of the American legacy, this kind of civil, open, democratic, honest discussion that reaches a consensus by majority vote.
Before we get to some audience questions, I have one more that I think would be great to have the panel weigh in on, which is there any validity to the Board of Peace? And why isn't it being mentioned now? I figured you might want to take this one first.
I remember when this was first coming up and I was doing an interview with BBC, and clearly a lot of people just kind of listen to the name and say, "Oh, that's dumb," but very few people do the sort of thing I do, which is to really read through all the bylaws and the way it is structured. There might have been a purpose to there being a very specific, focused, strongly backed by the United States and other key countries effort to support reconstruction in Gaza. This is not it. This is a vehicle for a certain group of people to do what they decide they want to do in the world. Because even though it was brought up in terms of Gaza, the actual wording has nothing to do with Gaza, does not stipulate any particular part of the world, but says it will have the flexibility to carry out actions in any part of the world where it decides it can be effective. So there is no coordination with the United Nations, with any other regional or international intergovernmental organizations. There is no ability to constrain its activities. There is also no clear purpose for it. Of course, one of the things that concerns me as a diplomat, having lived in many countries going through various kinds of political transitions, is that when you establish something that is in the hands of a very small number of people who are able to control or at least veto everything that happens, this is rarely a sign of good governance. It reminds me a bit of the Shah or Bashar al-Assad or, people who want to hold things very closely. Not a positive. The other thing that concerns me is that it has been presented as a possible alternative to the United Nations because particularly Americans tend to view the United Nations as sort of being big and clumsy and slow and ineffective, and certainly no one in the UN would say reforms could not be made. There is nothing that takes the place of the United Nations, particularly in terms of the ability it has to carry out functions, to support people in displacement who are refugees, to look at questions of human rights, to respond to devastation in different places. There is no other organized mechanism that can do that. So the Board of Peace cannot take the place of the United Nations. It cannot effectively do anything because it has no capacity to actually implement any decisions. But what it does is provide a vehicle for an intervention of any sort at any time, anywhere in the world that it deems productive. I frankly find this terrifying. So you may have thought that I was going to start out saying, oh, that's stupid, it's not a Board of Peace. This is true. But it is also a very dangerous precedent because it is a bit like going back to the East India Company and saying, we're a non-governmental thing and we're just going to do what we want. That didn't end well. this won't either. Us.
I'm going through our questions really quick. Mitri, I think this would be a great one for you. What is the best way to help a pastor who is culturally Zionist to become open to learning about the reality of Israel-Palestine?
I mean, it's not easy because he has to unlearn everything he has learned in his life. But it's not impossible. Because we always believe that change is possible. And this is very important for us as humans, to come back to what Rami said. Maybe I would encourage him maybe to buy one of the upcoming books that will come next year in Edmonds, and the title is What Made Me Change My Mind About Palestine. And many of them were Christian Zionist leaders, well-known leaders, others mainline leaders. They will share their stories. Hopefully, maybe some of these stories can help. But another very simple thing is invite him to Palestine and come with him. That is the best thing you can do. I remember an old lady, she was very evangelical, she was maybe in her 80s, and she came and visited, and she was really a great supporter of Israel. But after touring, she said, I don't care anymore what the Bible says, but what I see here is not right. And I think we need to bring more people to Palestine. That's what opens their eyes.
This one we touched on earlier today, I think in the beginning of our board meetings, but I would like to direct this to you, Joanne, and you, Rami, and it is how much responsibility for Israel versus Palestine conflict from before 1947 onward falls at the feet of Great Britain.
So we have to remember that even though the United States looms large in most foreign policy issues in the world today, it really did not so much prior to World War II. Certainly in the Middle East, Britain and France had long had a much stronger interest, connection, and ability to pull strings. Now, we have to go back and recognize that Russia had their people, and Britain had their people, and France had their people, and Italy had their people. And one of the marvelous things about the Middle East is that, particularly in the Levant, it's very heterogeneous. You have lots of different groups. But that also meant that during the European imperial period, everyone picked one of those groups, and it wasn't necessarily conducive to cohesion within the countries that were formed. That aside, the United States was not a biggie in that. So when we look at Great Britain, I do have to go back to World War I. I promise not to refight battles, but this is important. In World War I, Great Britain was pushing much more for an effort to fight against the Ottoman Empire, which was allied with Germany at the time, in the Middle East. And it wanted to get everybody on side. So it was trying to convince the Arab rebellion, coming out of Hijaz. It wanted to convince the Zionists who were playing themselves as a major force in Palestine. It wanted to convince the French. So promises were made everywhere. Mostly not, they were mutually exclusive. The importance of Britain is that when we look back from where we are now, We see it as a linear development from the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to the establishment of the State of Israel, and we just go on from there. The Balfour Declaration promised a State of Israel. Friends, it did not. It promised that, yes, we will view this with favor. This was their nod to them. There was a different nod to other people. When the mandate after World War I, which gave Britain a formal presence in Palestine under the League of Nations, then the Balfour Declaration was locked into the wording. But, you know, Palestine did not belong to Britain to give away. So when we have people who say, but the Balfour Declaration guaranteed this, we always have the ability to say Britain did not own Palestine in 1917. This was not, as the British would say, in their gift at the time. So Britain then was in a total mess because during the mandate they had an enormous pressure for lots and lots of Jewish immigration, particularly when things started getting bad in Europe. They had a lot of pressure because Palestinians were opposed to European settlers coming in, not to Jews coming in. There had always been Jews there. Many said, you know, if Jews are having problems, they can certainly come in. But to people coming in with the explicit intention of, we are taking this on behalf of an outside community that explicitly has different values. So tension was arising, and Britain was, as usual, saying, well, golly, this is harder than we thought it would be. And so they threw it back at the end to the United Nations and said, you figure out how to manage this. So yes, that may have been more history than you want, but it's important to understand that the United States was not the power that did all that. So Britain was very much a factor then, not so much now. You going to correct me?
Thank you. No, I'm going to just add a couple of more nuggets to that already bountiful meal. But she's the diplomat journalist, so I put it in much more blatant terms. The British invented duplicity, lying, falsehood, insincerity, backroom dealings, every bad thing you can think of in diplomacy that is dishonest. The British probably invented it because of their
I love
empire.
having him here so I don't have to say those things.
I should be more precise. The British government, not the British people. British people are great, but most of them. But they, except when they're drunk on Saturdays because of football and rugby matches. But it's the British government's track record is really atrocious, and it was because of the colonial nature of their empire. And this brings me back to what I mentioned at the very beginning. What we're seeing in the Middle East today, in the Levant especially, and Iran, and the wars, and the fake ceasefires, and everything that's going on, is a reconfiguration of the colonial imperial military traditions that the British didn't invent them, because the Dutch did some and others did things, but the British brought it into the savagery of the modern world with their advanced weapons back in that period. So I think the British have a huge debt that they have to pay back to humanity, not just to the Palestinians, but to all mankind. The second point I'd raise there is that if you look at the Middle East today, where are the real active wars, and where is the most significant resistance? The active wars are in Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine. Why is that? Because over a century, it's the British and the Americans and the Israelis who denied the Lebanese, Palestinian, and Iranian people their right to self-determination, sovereignty, statehood, and development. Those three countries in particular, they did bad things in other places, in Iraq and Yemen and whatever. But Lebanon, Iran, and Palestine are the three places where Western imperial colonialism, which was based on racism, apartheid, militarism, and a kind of an arrogance that the white people from the West had all the rights on the land, and these other people didn't exist. Even from the Balfour Declaration, it doesn't mention the word Palestinians. It talks of the Arabs, who were 93% of the people in Palestine in 1917, including my family in Nazareth, some of whom are still there, were Arabs, indigenous Arabs. There were Armenians, there were Circassians, there were other people, but 93% were not Jewish. They were Arabs. But the British, in their duplicitous chromosomes, could not come to say the Palestinians. They said the non-Jewish population will have their civil and religious rights respected. Not political rights, not national rights. But they say we support a national home for the Jewish people, but the non-Jewish population. I mean, if you had fed this into an AI supercomputer today and say, what's the most racist, duplicitous, dishonest thing you could come up with, they'd say the Balfour Declaration. I have no doubt about it in my mind. So, and I'll just finish by saying that the actions of the people who are supporting Israel today are doing it, I believe, to some extent. I'm not a psychiatrist, I can't judge, but to some extent there's a subconscious colonial imperial mentality, psyche that's at work there. That these white people, mostly white men, white old men, have more rights than anybody else in the region and can go around telling them what to do, how to live, where to live, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And I think there's a structural colonial imperial militancy in the US and UK that is very hard for them to get rid of. It's not an easy thing to do. It's like racism in the United States. It's also, or gender inequality, or there are...
Patriarchy. Patriarchy,
yeah. And all these are traditions, legacies that are there and are changing for the better in many places, but not all places. So I think the issue of the UK is really important, but it's not only the UK. The UK started the process and passed the baton on to the United States and to many other people.
Can I maybe just add, since we are talking about the British, just to give you some more ammunition against the British. Because the British actually, we talk as theologians about the original sin, right, in singular, but the British, they have three original sins. Because in that year, 1947, 1948, the British did three things, which until today are a problem in the world. They divided India from Pakistan along religious lines. They divided Palestine between Jews and Arabs along ethnic lines. And they divided between white and black in South Africa, enshrining apartheid. And these three problems are until today really big problems that the British started and nobody was able to. And just to build on what Rami said and to see how sick this mentality was, in 1947, there was in Jerusalem a leper house. We had in Palestine lepers. You hear in the Bible about the leper story. So we had until 1970 lepers in Palestine. But 1947, there was one home for lepers where we had Jews and Arabs, Christians, Muslims, and Jews in one home. The British came in 1947 and said, it is not good to have Jewish lepers and Arab lepers together in the same house. So they took the Arab lepers, they brought them to Silwan, and they took the Jewish lepers and they brought them to West Jerusalem. So that sick is it that you see.
So we actually have enough questions. We could probably go on for another hour and a half. But in the, I think they will kick us out before that. I'm so sorry. But in the interest of time, I'd love to ask each one of you to take 2 minutes or less, kind of wrap up some final thoughts of what you would like to share with our audience. Yeah, 2 minutes.
You know, the cultural differences between Arabs and Americans is really huge. When an Arab meets somebody, they spend 7 minutes just saying, "Hey, how are you? How's the family? How are the kids? How are you feeling?" But I will do my best.
Okay.
I think we've said
That's all I
that.
asked.
I think we've made the main points that we want to make. The last point I would make is that there is now a significantly changing global environment of supporting Israel or supporting Palestine or supporting justice for both of them, which is what I still say we should do. There's many people today who say, no, Israel has no right to exist. Get rid of Zionism, get rid of Israel. I don't quite go that far. I say we need to contain Zionism and to define it. They have to have borders, which they've never defined, and they have to have a constitution, which they've never created. They had promised the UN they would when they joined the UN. Anyway, I think we have to keep harnessing this incredible global support for this last anti-colonial struggle in the world to decolonize Palestine, and let the Palestinians and Israelis figure out a way. They will, because they both have a lot of great people. They can figure out how to do it. The United States has to essentially get out of the way. It cannot be the party that supports the war. So it cannot be the party that supports the Israeli efforts in the war, the genocides and the ethnic cleansing, and at the same time tries to mediate peace talks. It's totally non-believable. So I would end with those points that there are positive elements. There's a huge global movement for supporting Palestinian rights. How do we harness that to change the policies of a few governments? And I think it can be done. If South Africa and Northern Ireland were resolved, this can be resolved.
I'm going to switch to Iran. I know that hasn't been our main topic tonight, but it is one of the reasons that the balance of the world is kind of shifting at the moment. Iran is an incredibly complex country. I don't mean that it's not understandable. I mean that it is a large country. It has a diversity of economic activity. It has highly educated people, infrastructure, it has agricultural land, it has water, it has industry. It is not a country that is easily defeated. Saddam Hussein attempted to just grab a few oil fields, shortly after the Iranian Revolution, thinking that they were weakened. And that war lasted for 8 years, and Iran did not win. Iraq did not win. Iranians are enormously committed to their land, to their home, to their civilization. Not Arab, but still enormously committed. What we're looking at now is a difficulty in defining on the part of the United States, and certainly on the part of Israel, what they actually intended when they initiated this military action, and therefore what is negotiable as an agreement at the end. If the goal was to dislocate a strongly religious government, they may to an extent have done that, but it has shifted toward the more rigid, in a sense, security views of the IRGC. The IRGC is not explicitly religious, but it is explicitly we want to be in charge. So If we were concerned about having a religious government, the IRGC may in fact be an improvement. It may not make Iran easier for the West to deal with, but then again, Iran is kind of annoyed at being attacked. So, I think that's going to slow it down. I do think that we need to pay close attention to what is going on inside Iran, as opposed to just looking at what's happening with the Strait of Iran. And as I tell my students, that's the STRAIT Strait, because I'm sure you've had this argument with people. It is extremely interesting that it took the American-Israeli attack to awaken Iran to its ability to leverage its geography.
Yeah, maybe a few things. First of all, maybe to build on what was said now, to bring it back to the Balfour Declaration. What Israel is trying to do now, actually, with Trump, with the help of Trump, is to have like another kind of Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration brought these national states. But since actually 2003, Israel was trying to dismantle one country after the other, starting with Iraq, then Syria, now Lebanon, Palestine, anyhow, Iran now, so that Israel will have actually military hegemony over the region, so that you don't need Britain anymore, you don't need the US anymore. Israel actually is the Lord of the Middle East, and the only Lord. And I think this is very dangerous. And I hope that some Arab countries right now are waking up to see that actually defeating Iran would mean Israeli monopoly and hegemony. So this is my first point. My second point is there will be no peace in the region as long as Israel has full impunity. Political impunity, financial impunity, etc. Only if Israel will start paying for the mess that it's creating, it will stop doing it. But as long as Israel does the mess and then the US clean up, Israel will continue to do that. So we need to stop the impunity, which means we need to make Israel accountable. Without accountability, look, they did the genocide in Gaza. They were not accountable. So they now are doing it in Lebanon. And now they are moving to Iran because they learn, they can do it, and their big daddy comes always and pay for the mess they are creating. Another thing is keep talking about Palestine, because this is really, there is a change that Rami was talking about, and we need to be part of that change. And so I would like to end actually with this hopeful note, that there is a change, but as we say in Bright Stars of Bethlehem, our tagline is, hope is what we do, which means hope will not come from heaven down to us, but hope is what each one of us will do. And only if all together as a community will come together to be part of that change, which is happening, I think we can hopefully see a different future for all the people in the Middle East, without any exception.
We need your support. Our students need support to continue going and being the next generation of creative leaders in Palestine. So if you are able, what we would like to ask you to do is help us out tonight. For this panel discussion, we have a very generous $15,000 match. So if you were moved tonight and you see the hope and the change that is happening in Palestine and all of the amazing work that Mitri is doing at the university, we ask that you join us. Please consider a donation. Again, we have a $15,000 for dollar match tonight for this panel discussion. We are happy to take a donation. We have envelopes out there. If you need to think about it, what your gift might look like, how you've been transformed tonight and how you can help transform that next generation, please feel free to take the information home and contact us later this week. We really hope you will consider joining us and continuing this hope. And can we get one more round of applause for the panel? We encourage you on the way out to also stop by the table. Our panelists will be out in the lobby. We will also have books for sale of Mitri's. Remember those 54 books in 11 different languages? We don't have all 54. We cannot carry them all, but I think we have 4. So if you need some more reading, we encourage you to grab a book. We have them for sale. Mitri will be around to sign them. If you need more information after this panel event, if you are not already on our mailing list, there is a nice handy dandy iPad out there that you can type your information in and you will start getting our newsletter. And we always encourage you to go online to our website because you can see student stories. You can find out more information about events like this panel that continue to happen around the country. And you can get on our social media where you get up-to-date news, especially Mitri's travel schedule, which is hard to pin down, so you want to be on that list. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and please make your way out to the lobby.
Thank you.